It's really nice to be here. Since I'm not among only English native speakers, you also know that localization is important because you experience it every day that applications are not in your language. So what I'm going to talk about is not just generally localization, because you always want you of course want users to be able to experience and understand what they're reading, what the app does, and so on, and also fit their. You had the perfect example with the measurements before, that you have kilograms and pounds or stone and lots of different ways to measure things, and you want to have everything so that it fits your users. But something that's rarely done, and what I'm going to talk about today is the ability to switch the language of an application inside of the application. So usually you would switch the language for your phone, for the whole operating system, and then all the apps change, at least the ones that support your language. Yeah, usually, oh, that's me. I work for Evenly in Berlin, and that's my Twitter handle, so yell at me on Twitter, please. We do the app for Arte, which is a French-German TV station situated at the French-German border. Recently, download the app. It's also in the Polish App Store. You should do that. It's really good. I recommend it.
5 stars.
This is what it looks like. So this is French and German. Same content, different language. Just your standard localization that you would like to have. But there's something which you cannot see here but which is also a feature in the app, is just like when you watch in Netflix, for example, that you can switch the language of the videos that you're watching. So if you watch your video, you can switch between French, English, or with subtitles and without, and so on, for the video. That's not what I'm going to talk about today. I'm really talking about switching the language of the application. Okay, usually you should not do it. Don't. So you might as well just leave now and just take away this. Don't build an in-app application switcher. It will cause you nightmares. There will be bugs. There will be lots of work. There will be usability problems. It's going to be terrible, I'm telling you. And I'm going to tell you why it's terrible is because localization is hard. It's complex. There's so many things that go into it. So, for example, in iOS, this is system iOS settings for languages. So you cannot only set the language for the phone, but you can also have a list of preferences of languages. So this phone is set to French. As you can see, there's Général, Langue et les régions, which means back to general and language and region settings. And then you have Ordre préféré des langues. That means preferred order of languages. So that means if there's French available, you will get French. If there's English, you will get English. If there's Russian, you get Russian. If there's all of these are not available, you will choose Chinese. So depending on what languages you speak, it actually makes a lot of sense, because most applications are not localized in all languages, as you know. And also, you might speak a language, but you might not be in the country where that language is the native language. Or there are many countries that have more than one language spoken. So you also have region settings, which is here, region. In this case, it's Poland. So regional settings affect things like currency, number formatting, which day of the week does the week start, what are the name of the months, and so on. And also there are different calendars. There's just not only the regular Gregorian calendar, but also Buddhist calendar, Islamic calendar, Indian calendar, and so on and so on and so on. And down at the bottom, you can see basically what French Buddhist who's in Poland, what kind of formatting he would like to have. This is what it looks like. So Buddhist is already in the year 2559. Yeah. Also remember that when you create forms to enter dates. So this is an incomplete list, just to recapitulate, is language, region, country, which can be different. There are regions which are not countries, or there are regions which are not internationally recognized, but which you might want to have in your app. So Taiwan, for example, officially called the Republic of China, is not the People's Republic of China, and so on and so on. It's really complicated. Then there's calendars, times, time zones, different number formaters. Do you use decimal points, decimal commas? What kind of currencies do you have? Then there's like reforms of currencies, like new shekel, the old shekel, old francs, and so on. It's hard. Measurement, we already had that, and yeah, it's terrible. So there's some standards internationally how to represent that. You've probably seen at least the programmers among you have seen the first line is like English, Great Britain, English, US, Polish in Poland, German in Germany. That's easy. The next one, UA. Does anybody know that one? Can you see UA? Do you know what that is? It's Cantonese. Cantonese is a language that's spoken in southern China. Then the next one is Spanish, Spain, which is some kind of, and that pre-Euro is something to do with currency. I can't tell you the details. Then the last one is one of the harder ones. So that's like, we turning all the features on. It's like ZH is Chinese, Han traditional. No, it's ZH is China. Oh, no, now I'm confusing it also. Well, the HK is Hong Kong, POSIX is POSIX time. Collation, pinyin, is a way of writing Chinese, but not in Chinese character, but with Latin characters. And currency is a Chinese new. No, yen is, no, it's something else. Yuan? Yuan, exactly. Okay. It gets worse. So I'm an iOS programmer, so that's the API I use to deal with localization. It's called NSLocale, or if you're a Swift 3 user, it's just locale. These are like just constants that are in there. So ISO language codes, which are like DE for German, EN for English, PL for Polish. There exist like 594 languages. And there are a lot more languages in the world. There are like tens of thousands. But if you really want to be thorough with the localization, 594 are the ones that at least iOS supports. And you have like the corresponding region codes and so on and so on and so on. It's terrible. It's a lot. And this is so small because there's so many other things that also can depend on the locale. Let me see if I can read that. This like calendar uses the metric system. What kind of currency symbol does it have? Not only the name, but the symbol. An example character set. So, yeah. And then there's number formatting. Currency, decimal points, currency, commas. This is a really nice example of when you do localization, use the tools that come with the operating systems. So for example, if you want to format numbers for decimals or want to have like a space at for the thousands or a comma or an apostrophe or a full stop, you don't have to research that on your own. So you can just like use the built-in locales, use the formatting tools, use the APIs that come with the operating system, and they're really, really, really powerful, and basically take away a lot of the work that you don't have to do. So let's check that out. What that looks like in code. see if you can see this. Oh, okay. So this is basically the list, the long list of things that we had before, which is like ISO language codes, which are a really long list. Yeah, it's pretty long. See here, so long that it doesn't even show up here. Language code and so on and so on. And there's also what you can see back here is the preferred languages. In this case, the user was really nice and just selected English, so that's pretty simple. This is an example of how like number formatting objects can be set up. So this is a number formatter. In this case, I want to have numbers that are for accounting. So currency, does the currency symbol come in front of the number or after the number, for example? And for dates also, there are like many different ways of formatting dates. Month before day, year, where do I put that? Do I put a comma? Pff, I don't know. That's why you ask a computer to do that for you. So what I do now is I have two locales set up. One is Polish, just the language, and the other one English. And here, this is basically the list of all of the 700 and where is it? 39 different identifiers in total. And in this case, I just picked a random one, which is in this case Qatar. And I'll walk you through this a little bit more in detail. What basically gets you here is the outputs in Polish, so this locale, in Polish, give me this one, this locale, which is Arabic in Qatar, in Polish. It's arabski. Is that okay? Okay, so in English, I'm using an old version of the API here. If anybody of you is an iOS developer and doing Swift 3 conversion, good luck. This is English, basically the same thing. And here we have what's Arabic in Arabic. I know, does anybody speak Arabic here? Sadly, no. Qatar, Qatar, and Qatar, really easy. Then we have a different currency symbol, different decimal separator. And then we have a date here. Once in the Gregorian calendar here, and Islamic calendar on here. So now we pick a new number here. Tell me some number between 0 and 738, please. 492. 492. Oops. Okay. So, oh, Russian. Rosyjski. Ruski? So currency symbol is apparently missing. Looks like we see the decimal separator is different, and also the Islamic calendar in Russian looks like this. And you see it's like 4038 in the Islamic calendar. Okay, try another one. Oh. Another number, please. 2. English for Cameroon. Let's look at that. Let's try a different calendar, maybe a Hebrew calendar. As you can see, the Jews have been around for a while. Okay, we do one more, I think, but you get the picture.
Yeah. 738.
738. You work in software testing, do you? Ukraine. Yeah, Ukraine and Ukraine, which is actually a good example because we could also just hard code this for Russian Ukraine. Russian. No, Ukraine is UA. Oops. See? It's Russian, but it's Ukraine. See, that's how it works together. That's why there's so many things going there. And also, if you've watched the currency symbol, you see, it all changes. Okay. That was difficult, wasn't it? Okay, just a short thing about like how to use the APIs is, for example, in iOS. Oh, this screen is so small. Okay, let's see if I can format this a bit better. Okay. So what it allows you is for the system that we've seen before, so the user can select a preference of languages, and your app supports another set of languages, and you want to find out which one of the languages is the best one. So this is the API for that. It's on bundle or NS-bundle, preferred localizations from. So in this case, this one is the ones that the app supports. So in this case, Polish, German, and English. And the user only speaks Hebrew and Polish, so we get out Polish. If we add Hebrew here too, we get a list of, Hebrew, because it's before in the preferences, before the other ones. That's how it works. We can also, down here, we have another thing. So we can also put out the languages in their own language. Oops. So in this case, it's German, Polish, English, and Hebrew, which is down here, and Hebrew. What we do here is we basically, for all the languages identifiers that we have up here, we create a locale, which is the object that represents the language and all the associated configuration data, and then just ask all of these locales to format, to give them our name for the language in their own language. It's really easy, isn't it? Okay. Now more pictures. That's easier. Good. So use the APIs. Apple has excellent localization APIs. They're not everything supports localization, but most things do. So just search the API for locale or with locale. For example, here you have uppercasing of strings with a locale, which I didn't know existed either before I researched for this talk. But apparently, there's like different rules of how to uppercase strings. Calendars and so on. It's great APIs. Just don't forget to use them if you use. Now that you know that it's complicated, you know also why you don't want to roll your own. And above this already complex system, you really don't want to add like another layer of your own. But you might want to do it, and I'm gonna tell you why. So one thing is, which we just saw with locales, is that it's not just about language. It can also be about country or religion or like a different segment. So when we say we switch the language, what we're actually doing is not switching the language, we're switching the content, which is something that many of us probably know from not only changing the audio track from when you're watching a movie, but also when you play a computer game, for example. Because you don't want to have the bad dubbing where you miss all the jokes, so you switch it to English to have the best experience. One thing that you all know here is the Apple iTunes Store, where you can download apps. And the App Store is available in Poland, but it's not in Polish. But still, it's something where you would think you're not switching the language, you're basically changing the store It's just related to a country and a language at the same time. And that's also something we had to do, which is we went from French and German, which is mostly the same content, but not for everything, but like 98% was the same content. Sometimes there was like small differences. But now the family grew. So we had not only have French, German, but we have Spanish, English, and Polish. And as you can see really well is that the content is totally different. For the first two, which are German and French, you can see it's basically the same layout. There's a banner for the German one because there's like a small ad. But the German and the French one look pretty similar. But if you look down to the tab bar, you can see in navigation that the German and French ones have like 5 items and the other ones have only 3. So here you can see that it's not just the language that changes, but the whole content. And also the user interface layout changes. It's totally different. Like here is the list of things. There's like this nice button, which is not here. And the content for these 3, like Spanish, Polish, and English is also different. Like you have different, the top video is different. The videos down here are different too. So what that enables, so why wouldn't you just like couple that to, for example, to the region settings or to the language settings or whatever? It's exactly that people travel to different countries, speak different languages, might want to, might speak more than one language, and you don't want to shut them out of the content that's available for the other languages. So just to recap, it's not only the content can be affected, the user interface language can be affected, the layout can be affected, the features can be turned off and on, and so on. So how are we in time? Good. And its localized string is the iOS and macOS method that you call when you want to have a localized string of a string, localized version. That's saved in .strings files, which are nothing but a serialization of a long dictionary, so it's just key value. Some people don't know that and think it's like just some magic file format, but it's super simple. It just has a weird UTF-16 encoding because it's old. And if you're on macOS, you can use user libexec plistbuddy to just open it and explore it, and also edit it in your scripts if you want to. So, and as localized string, the method, when you look at where it's defined, it's actually really ugly. It's defined in NS bundle header, and it's a macro. So, I don't know, I can't read this. So let's look at the Swift version of it. Wow, you can read this. This is nice. So what do we have? Input and output. It's pretty easy. So we have a key. So okay, keys and values. So you get something in, you get something out of that. Then we have a table name. Table, not this kind of table probably. A bundle. Value, and a comment. That's a lot of things. To break it down, it's actually not, a bundle is on iOS is basically like a group of files, or like an app can be as a bundle, just a collection of things, which you usually don't need to care about. And the only 2 things you really need to care about here is key and table name. So key is where you identify it's basically the thing that all the different translations have in common. They all correspond to the same key. And table name is just the name of the file, so en.strings or fr for English strings, fr.strings for French strings. This actually, what it does, if you look at the Objective-C version, you can see that it's just a macro around NS bundle and just calls bundle localized string for key. So instead of using this function, we can basically go one layer deeper and go to NS bundle. And also here, you see the method the function already looks similar, but has less parameters, which is nice because then it's easier to understand. So you just have key, value, and table. What value does is basically a replacement if you if there's no real value to be had, like you can get like a default value back. Okay. Oh wow. So let's write our own version of and localized string. So this is modeled a little bit like after Arte. So what we have here is we basically introduce our own data type to represent the languages that we support. In this case, it just supports German and English, German and Polish. And maybe you also could have something like undefined language if you cannot guess the language or for some other reason that you might need for your logic. List of all languages. Then we have here is something that that I've showed you before already. Oh God, this is. Let's see if this indents a bit better. No, it's only gets worse. But this is basically the same thing. That's tries to guess the best language, just using the same thing we did here before. Basically, you have two lists, and you pick the best one. Ask the system to pick the best one. You don't have to do anything your own. Just call preferred localizations. This is what's here, just not to. And then we need some kind of conversion between our own data types that we use to represent the languages that we want to have to locale, which is the system API, and maybe also in the other way around. So from locale, from an app language, create a locale, or create a locale, or create an app language from a locale. So this is app language, an enum of two things. I hope you're all fluent in Swift, so. Good. Now we just need a place to store our current language. We can create an object that we call app language manager because we're bad at naming things. Define a notification. So when we change the language, we can just fire a notification, and any other object in the application can listen for this change, and then adjust the user interface, for example. Okay. Let's see. This. So instead of when we re-implement localized string, we basically just call on bundle we call localized string, and basically just use our own wrapper where we just get we get the current language and define and get the name of the table that should be looked up. It's improved? No. Okay. So you just get the name of the table that we should look. So the table is the file on disk where the translations are stored in a key value format. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. Now we can basically, instead of everywhere in the app, instead of NS localized string, we would use app localized string or our own better name of that. So it's basically a one-to-one replacement of the API. You can also, of course, if you're brave, you can swizzle a localized string on bundle and then inject your own code there, but I would not recommend that. Okay. We're not done yet. So now we have our own way of reading our localized strings from a file. That's pretty good. It helps us for all the strings that we set ourselves in our own user interface. But we might use system elements, and there are things like default styles for button. When you just call the button a done button, it just localizes it automatically to done in the correct language. or cancel. Then you have system errors, which come like from deep APIs, for example, it tells you, oh, this request failed, do you want to try again? Or there's no internet, or disk is full. And if you have these error messages that come from deep in the system and that basically bubble up to your user interface, you should think about, do I want to show, for example, an English error in a Polish user interface? Or do I want to like intercept that, maybe change the message? For typical error codes that I'm expecting, I can localize those, but not the others. Definitely something to keep in mind, and it can look really weird if things like that come from the bottom. And also, other system APIs. So these are the email composing window, adding an event to a calendar, Spotlight, which is a search indexing service, and what's also like, for example, widget titles, which are also like just read by the system from a configuration file where you cannot go at runtime. So you might end up in some places with a little bit of a weird mix of languages. You can try, in some cases, you can try to swizzle your way around that, like hack the system a bit, but that of course comes with more pain, more time, and possible breakage. We've actually had a user error report which had 3 languages in one screenshot, which was kind of interesting. We were only able to reduce it to 2 languages. Okay, so we have a localization system. We have our own language, define the language that we support. Now we actually need to change the language. That's more difficult than it sounds. So what you should do is download my language switching SDK. It's really good. No, of course, don't do that. It's really simple. It's really simple, actually. Just call, when you change the language, just call exit. App crashes. User launches the app launches the new language. You don't have a problem. This is the easiest solution. By far. So other possibilities are listen to notifications everywhere in the application, change all the strings, change the content, reload your user interface in an active state. Can use key value observing for that too. Inject all your dependencies. You can use reactive programming for that. If you are careful and do everything correctly, it might even work. Or what we're doing is we just throw away basically the whole application and do like a soft reboot, which is also what Apple does with iOS. When you change the language, the screen goes black and it just restarts Springboard, so the place where all your app icons lives. So I think that's a good approach. But one of the things that you have to rebuild, it's just not all your view controllers for Android people, it's like activities. Throw them all away, build them again, and then you might want to think about, do I want to basically restore after the language switch to a state which is most similar to the one that I left? Or do I just like go to like a default state? Since people are maybe not switching the language so often, you can probably get away without restoring lots of like state in the UI, like scroll positions, for example. Also remember, it's just not that just the UI, but also other objects that live, like number formatters that we talked before. Like we had several bugs where after a language switch, we would still show the French date on a German app if you switched from French to German, or the other way around. You always basically got the date formatting of the last language, and which is something you don't want, but something that happens easily because Especially on iOS, for date and number formatting, those objects are kind of a little bit expensive to create, so you usually cache them to keep them around. So if you're not caching them correctly, or yeah, I mean, caching is a hard problem, we all know that. Third-party SDKs, that can be a lot of fun, especially if you have like advertisement, tracking, analytics, and so on. They're often not the most well-designed, I'd say. And they also often assume that you basically configure them once and then send events, and that's it. But rarely do they have the ability to reconfigure them. Some support that, some don't. Sometimes you might get weird events in your tracking. But yeah, sometimes you just like, you have to expect to just have some bad tracking. That's sad, but otherwise, don't use, if you dependency inject correctly, this is actually a lot easier, because then the way, when you build your app systematically and you know which component depends on which others and which objects are used by which and where you create them and so on in their life cycle, rebuilding the whole app is a lot easier, a lot. If you use singletons everywhere on global variables, you will have a bad time. Okay. So then there's all kinds of hacks that around system APIs that might also not be supporting changing the whole application and relaunching them, because you're not part of the typical application lifecycle. So for example, on iOS, if you change the root view controller, which is basically the first view that you give the system when the app starts, and it's always assumed that this one changes, that's why it's called the root. You don't change it, you just like add other view controllers below that. But if you try to change it and it works, what happens is that you leaking the old view controller. It never gets released. It's still there. So you basically, what then happens is you have your old UI and that you want to throw away, and the new created UI, you have that in front of them. So if you switch language several times, you have like 6 times your UI in front of each other, which we also like took a little bit to discover how that it actually happens and then how to solve it. And you will run into issues like that, definitely. Because when you use APIs, not in the way that they're designed, but differently, that stuff will break. So this is just one of the examples. What's done here is, you can barely read this. So we set, what's done here is that the new view controller is set, and then we basically go through all the view hierarchy and search for certain objects and remove those, because otherwise it clicks. Okay. So Apple's APIs are really great. Use them. And you can customize if you need. And if you customize, also use the APIs, because they're really well built. Like, you can profit a lot from them. Not only when you directly use them, but also when you kind of build your own layer on top. Still, the more you use them, the less problems you will have with all your number formatting, month names, language names, and so on. Thank you.
I have a question. You mentioned the third-party SDKs that you may or may not use in an app like this. Are you using these?
The question was if we're using third-party SDKs, and yes, we're using several.
So you made statements about, if they're well-designed or whatever. Even if it's well-designed, which means it follows Apple's standards and everything, it has a totally different understanding of when and how it's going to localize stuff. It may use zips, for example, which you can't do anything about in the example you described. Do you have any SDKs or frameworks that you use that are like that, and how did you get around them?
Okay, so the question was, there are SDKs which don't conform to Apple standards or which don't expect you to change the locale or language. And what we do about that, and yes, that happens. For example, a good example about that is Facebook SDK. You can try to work around that by just using certain modes of the SDK, like some allow, like, for example, like the login SDKs allow you to use native login or write your own UI or use a web view, for example. So sometimes you might, when you use those, you might like find one of those modes might work. That's what we usually did. So for most of the part, we wrote our own UI for stuff like that. And that's, I mean, it's not too hard. It's just nothing here is like super difficult. It's just like lots of little things that you need to take care of once you go custom. And it's also, yes, it's true. Like third-party SDKs, they just usually are built for the simplest use case, and also try to make it as easy for the developer to configure and use. So some are just like, you have like 3 lines of one call for setting up the SDK, and then you have like one global or one singleton where you just like call and push out events, and that's all you do. But that also means it's you might not be able to change anything about it. It might not support to be deconfigured or log out or something and reconfigured in a new way. Yeah, but usually there are ways. You just have to be. Sometimes some third-party things are open source. There's one advertisement SDK that we're using, and they're open source, and you can just like do their work for them and do pull requests for the feature that you want, or just yell at them. And yeah, that often works. So those all are solvable problems.
What about supporting right-to-left layout like Arabic, Hebrew on older versions of iOS? Do you recommend some libraries?
So the question is supporting right-to-left languages, what you can do. One thing is iOS got a lot better in supporting right-to-left languages with when you're using auto layout to lay out your UI, like leading and trailing, actually it refers to the direction of the language. So if you're using auto layout to lay out, for example, labels and text fields, you might not need to change anything. It will just work automatically. But yes, definitely is also a good point for, if you support right-to-left languages, probably, if you don't test, stuff will be broken, definitely. The same for, the same is true for all kinds of localization. If you don't test your localization, there's probably labels that don't fit the text, or you have like some field where you can enter names which says like first name, last name, and then somebody tries to enter the name, but they don't have a last name. They just have like a name, and then your like form validation tells them, no, this is wrong. If you filled out US American forms, they often require a middle initial, which Europeans don't all have, so then you're also like stuck. Just put M for middle initial there or something.
F or something else.
Good, then I'll show you one last trick. And that's because localized strings files are UTF-16 files. So if you diff them, the git diff doesn't really like anything besides ASCII and UTF-8. But you can teach Git to diff pretty much all kinds of file that you can convert to UTF-8. So you could also use that to diff your PNG files, for example, if you want to output the pixels to some kind of UTF-8 format. I just leave this here. You can copy and paste this from my GitHub account, where you can find the talk and where you can find the code, and you can get lost in playing with the localization. Thank you.